A woman in Ohio turns 62, walks into her local Social Security office, and files for benefits that same week. A financial planner 2 states away hears about it and winces. On paper, she just locked in a monthly check that's roughly 30% smaller than if she'd waited 5 more years. By most of the advice floating around online, she made a mistake. She didn't. Her husband had stopped working 18 months earlier with no benefit of his own to speak of, and her filing was the only way his household saw another dollar of Social Security income that year. The mistake put food on the table. The bigger question buried in her decision is one almost nobody explains clearly. This isn't really a math problem with one right answer. It's a set of trade-offs that look different depending on who you are, who depends on you, and how long you expect to be around to spend the money. That's what we're going to work through. Start with what actually happens to your check depending on when you file. If you were born in 1960 or later, the Social Security Administration sets your full retirement age at 67. File at that exact age and you get 100% of what's called your primary insurance amount, the benefit calculated from your highest 35 years of earnings. File at 62, the earliest age allowed, and that check is permanently cut by about 30%. Wait past 67 all the way to 70, and you pick up delayed retirement credits that push your payment up to roughly 124% of the full amount. For 2026, the administration's own published figures for someone who earned the maximum taxable wage every year of their career put the monthly benefit at $2,969 if they file at 62, $4,152 at full retirement age, and $5,181 at 70. Most people won't hit those maximum numbers, but the percentages scale the same way no matter your earnings history. So the spread between the earliest and latest filing age is real money, and it's permanent. That's exactly why so much financial content boils this down to a single instruction. Wait as long as you possibly can. And if your only goal were to maximize the size of your monthly check, that instruction would be correct every time. But nobody actually lives their life trying to maximize the size of one number on one government statement. People live with spouses, medical histories, mortgages, job markets that don't always want 59-year-olds, and retirement accounts that behave unpredictably. All of that changes the equation. Let's put two people into this, call them Denise and Tom, not real people, just a composite of situations that show up constantly in retirement planning conversations. Denise is 62, recently laid off from a logistics company after 26 years, and she's single. Her own knees have given her trouble for a decade, and both her parents passed in their early 70s. She has about $40,000 in savings, no pension, and a part-time job prospect that pays maybe $15,000 a year if it comes through. Tom is also 62, but he's married to Carol, who is 63 and never built up much of a work record of her own. Tom has a modest 401k, around $310,000, and he's still working a desk job he could keep doing until 70 without much strain. Denise and Tom are both staring at the same wait until 70 advice. It fits neither of them well for very different reasons. Take Denise first. The often cited break-even age, the point where a person who delayed filing finally catches up in total dollars received to someone who filed early, typically falls somewhere in the late 70s to early 80s, depending on which two ages you're comparing and what assumptions you use for inflation and investment returns. Comparing 62 to full retirement age, that crossover tends to land around 78. Comparing 62 all the way to 70, it's closer to 80 or 81. Those are useful benchmarks, but the Social Security Administration itself actually pulled its break-even calculator off its website years ago because too many people were treating a rough estimate as a guarantee. It isn't one. It depends on your actual longevity, which nobody can know in advance, along with taxes, cost of living adjustments, and what you'd have done with the money in the meantime. Here's the honest way to use that number. Nobody should claim early because they've decided with certainty that they'll die young. That's not a bet anyone can responsibly place, and no one should make claiming decisions based on a specific diagnosis or prediction about their own lifespan. But it is reasonable to weigh your family health history, your current condition, and a doctor's honest input as one factor among several. If Denise's realistic planning horizon points toward her mid to late 70s rather than her 90s, filing earlier and receiving more of her total lifetime benefit while she's alive to use it isn't reckless. It's just weighing the trade-off with open eyes instead of chasing the biggest possible check on a timeline she may never see. Then there's the piece almost nobody brings up first. Denise doesn't have a spouse depending on her filing date, but Tom does. Under Social Security's rules, a spouse generally can't collect a spousal benefit, worth up to 50% of the worker's full retirement age benefit, until the worker actually files for their own retirement benefit. If Tom decides to chase the bigger check and waits until 70, Carol goes without any spousal income for 8 more years, even though she's ready to retire now. That's not a hypothetical. That's 8 years of household cash flow Tom is trading away in exchange for a larger check that starts later and only benefits the household from that point forward. For couples with a big gap in earnings history, the decision genuinely has to be modeled as a household income stream, not two separate optimization problems. And it doesn't stop at spousal benefits. Survivor benefits work differently and matter more the longer a marriage lasts. When one spouse dies, the survivor can switch to the deceased spouse's benefit amount if it's higher than their own, up to 100% of what the deceased was receiving, though claiming that survivor benefit before the survivor's own full retirement age results in a permanent reduction, with a floor of about 71.5% if claimed at exactly age 60. Here's the part that surprises people, because the survivor benefit is generally based on what the higher earner was actually receiving at death. The higher earner's filing decision often has an outsized effect on how much income the surviving spouse lives on for the rest of their life, sometimes decades after the first spouse is gone. In a household like Tom and Carol's, where Tom's earnings record is much stronger, there's a real argument for Tom delaying specifically to protect Carol's future survivor benefit, even if Carol herself files on her own smaller record earlier to bring in some income now. That's a coordinated household strategy, not a single right age for one person. Employment status matters too, and this is where a lot of early filers accidentally hurt themselves without realizing it. If you file before full retirement age and you're still earning meaningful income, Social Security's earnings test kicks in. In 2026, if you're under full retirement age all year, the limit is $24,480. Earn above that, and the administration withholds $1 in benefits for every $2 over the limit. In the calendar year you reach full retirement age, the limit jumps to $65,160, with a gentler $1 for 3 withholding rate, and it disappears completely once you actually hit that birthday. Withheld benefits aren't simply gone forever. Social Security recalculates your monthly amount upward once you reach full retirement age to credit you back for months that were withheld. But in the meantime, it can feel like you filed early for nothing. If you're still working substantially, filing at 62 is usually the wrong move regardless of your other circumstances. Now, if you're serious about figuring out where you and John explains money, and where you and I can go deeper on this, that's exactly the kind of channel this is. Real numbers, no scare tactics, just the trade-offs laid out honestly. I'm John, and if that's useful, subscribing means you won't miss the follow-up breakdowns on things like taxation of benefits and Medicare timing, both of which factor into this same decision and deserve their own full treatment. Because there's more to weigh, even after health, spouses, and employment are settled. If you've already stopped working and you've got meaningful savings, the math can bend in an unexpected direction. Every dollar you pull from an investment portfolio in your first years of retirement is a dollar that stops compounding. And if a market downturn hits early in retirement while you're drawing heavily from that portfolio, the damage to your long-term balance can be permanent, a risk planners call sequence of returns risk. Using an earlier, smaller Social Security check to cover part of your living expenses can mean withdrawing less from your investments during exactly the years that withdrawal timing matters most. That's a legitimate reason some people with real savings still choose to file early, separate entirely from health or spousal considerations. On the flip side, some people look at that same early check and think about investing it instead of spending it, hoping market returns outpace the roughly 8% annual increase they'd get from delaying. That's a real strategy some investors use, but it swaps a guaranteed increase for an uncertain one. And markets don't deliver steady 8% years on command. It's a bet, not a plan, unless you go in fully aware of that. There's also the quieter case of a pension or an annuity landing in a few years. Income already built into the plan that will cover expenses once it starts. Filing early in that scenario just bridges the gap between now and when that guaranteed income begins, without needing Social Security to do the heavy lifting forever. One more factor nobody should skip: taxes. Up to 85% of your Social Security benefit can be counted as taxable income depending on your total combined income in retirement. So the number on your benefit statement isn't necessarily the number that lands in your account. And retirement income planning can't be fully separated from healthcare costs either. Medicare eligibility generally begins at 65, 2 years after the earliest Social Security filing age, which means anyone filing at 62 needs a real plan for health coverage in that gap, whether that's employer coverage, COBRA, or a marketplace plan. So back to Denise and Tom. Denise, single, physically worn down by decades of manual work, with a shorter, realistic planning horizon and no spouse relying on her filing date, files at 62, not out of desperation, but because it fits her actual life. Tom holds off, protecting Carol's future survivor benefit and letting his own check grow, while Carol files on her own smaller record now to bring some income into the house immediately. Same rules, same government formulas, two completely different and completely defensible decisions. If there's a single takeaway here, it's this. Don't ask what's the biggest possible check I can get. Ask what your household actually needs, who's depending on your filing date, what your realistic health picture looks like, what other income is already lined up, and what happens to your taxes and healthcare costs along the way. Log into your Social Security account and look at your own numbers at 62, at full retirement age, and at 70. Have the honest conversation with your spouse about whose record should lead and whose should follow. And if the picture still feels tangled, a few $100s spent with a fee-only planner who can run your specific numbers is often worth far more than that in the decision it helps you avoid getting wrong. There isn't a universally correct age to file. There's only the age that matches the life you're actually living and the people who did the work to figure out which one that is.